self-concept and self-esteem. Self-concept is the answer to the question, who am I? So if you think about who you are, one way to do that is to take out a piece of paper and write at the top the words I am, and then number 1 through 10 and complete the sentence with 10 different adjectives or nouns to describe yourself. So if we look at an example of that, you might say, I am a great mom, an average student. I am serious. I am a musician. I am overweight. I am extremely tired. I am strong-willed. I am fun with kids. I am indecisive. I am in love. These are just 10 ways of describing yourself. You could number up to 100 or even 500 or 1,000. And all of these would be part of your self-concept or how you see yourself. We move on and we think about how do you feel about these traits. And so what you would do here is next to those 10 items that you wrote down, you would write either a plus sign to indicate you feel positively about that trait, or a minus sign to indicate that it's something you don't feel so good about. You could also write a plus/minus if it's something you're not sure about. So if we look at the example, you might feel good about being a great mom or dad. You might be okay with being an average student. You're good with being serious and a musician. Maybe you're not so good with being overweight and certainly not so good about being extremely tired. You're good about being strong-willed and being fun with kids. You're not good with being indecisive and good with being in love. And these are obviously judgments that we have about ourselves. And when we talk about these judgments and this group of judgments we have about ourselves, really what we're talking about is our self-esteem, or how do we feel about ourselves. And so most of us have both positives and negatives in terms of how we feel about ourselves. I want to just point something out about these positives and negatives. The words that you use to describe yourself matter. And so if you look at the negatives here, let's say you describe yourself as indecisive. That might be a negative. However, that same trait could be described as thoughtful or cautious, and that might be a positive. If we look at another one, stubborn, which is listed as a negative, that same trait could be sticks to my guns, and that would be positive. So I just want to say that it matters how you use words to describe yourself, and if you hear yourself, if you think while you're talking to yourself and you're saying something like I am and something negative, think, is there a positive way that you could address that? Because it'll change how you feel. There are effects of having low self-esteem, and when we talk about what is low self-esteem, it's when you have more negatives than positives, right? So a negative overall evaluation of yourself. A person with low self-esteem is likely to disapprove of others, especially in their area of low self-esteem. And so let's say when I was a new mom and I joined the PTA for the first time, I really have low self-esteem about myself as an athlete. And I remember at this first PTA meeting, this woman started to walk up to me and she had these just, crazy strong arms. And I automatically started thinking, oh, she can't be a good mom because she must just spend all of her time working out. And I caught myself, right? And I was like, what am I doing? And I realized I was putting her down because I didn't feel good about myself. It had nothing to do with her. Turns out she was the president of the PTA and she was just coming over to introduce herself. So it just shows you how wrong my first perception was. A person with low self-esteem expects rejection. And so you might go into an interview expecting to be rejected, or go into asking someone on a date expecting to be rejected. And of course, that has consequences. A person with low self-esteem is intimidated by others they feel are superior. So somebody who I think is better than me as an athlete, I'm going to feel intimidated by them, and maybe I'm just going to walk away or not participate in that activity. A person with low self-esteem does not work well for a boss with high standards. Well, that makes sense, right? Because if your boss has high standards, you're afraid if you have low self-esteem, you can't make those high standards. And so you just stop trying. And then a person with low self-esteem does not perform well while being watched. And we'll talk more about this we talk about high self-esteem. When we look at people who have high self-esteem, we see a whole different set of traits. And so a person with high self-esteem is likely to think highly of others, especially in that area where they have high self-esteem. So for me, I actually have high self-esteem in terms of teaching. And so I often get observed by other teachers. And I also like to go to teachers' classes that I know are really good teachers. And when I go into those classes, rather than being intimidated, I want to learn how to be a better teacher. And so because I already have confidence in my teaching, I know I can get better. And so when I'm watching these higher level teachers in their element, I'm thinking, okay, I want to do this. How can I do it? And so I'm able to feel comfortable around those others that I see as superior, which you also see on this list. A person with high self-esteem performs well when watched, and we can see this in some of the reality TV shows. If you ever watch American Idol or The Voice, somebody might do their audition and they get up in front of the judges and all of a sudden it's like a notch up, or they get in front of an audience and they sing even better. And that's when somebody has high self-esteem, you see that sort of performance edge. Now, if somebody has low self-esteem, you see the opposite. So they might be very talented, but when they're in front of people, you see them make mistakes or look like too shy or embarrassed. A person with high self-esteem works better for a boss with high standards. And in fact, somebody with high self-esteem really wants a boss with high standards because they want to keep doing better and better and better. And if they have a boss with low standards, maybe you've experienced this, they really want to quit, or they might even like try harder. They might go beyond the standards that the boss gives them. And if the boss doesn't give them more responsibility, they're going to be bored. They might even just quit the job because it's not interesting to them. Now we're going to talk about the relationship between self-esteem and communication behavior. And there's two cycles that I want to address. We're going to start with the negative cycle. The negative cycle always starts and ends with low self-esteem. And the lesson here is if you start the day with low self-esteem, you are very, very likely to end the day with low self-esteem. And as we go through the cycle, you'll see the reason for that. So let's say that you have low self-esteem about interviewing, and you have an interview today for a job you really want. Before you even get in the car to go for the interview, if you have low self-esteem, you're going to start having these negative thoughts. I'm never going to get the job. They're not going to like me. I'm not good enough. I don't have proper clothes for this interview. I don't even know why I'm going, right? You start to have that I'm going to get rejected thought. You get to the interview, if you get that far, and then you have these undesirable behaviors. Even though you know the answers to the question and you really want the job, maybe your voice cracks, or you look down and away from the interviewer, or you give an answer and you know there's a better answer, but you're just not confident enough to say, you know what, I think there's something else I'd like to add. And so at the end of the interview, you're not feeling good again, and so you're having more negative thoughts. Oh, they're not going to give me the job. I was probably the worst interview ever. Why would anybody want me in their company? And so again, you end the day with low self-esteem. Now, the interesting thing is, let's say you got the job offer. All that negative thinking, and you still got the job offer. If you truly have low self-esteem, you're likely to justify why they gave you the job offer. You're likely to think, oh, nobody else must want that job, or they just gave it to me because they needed somebody who is my age and with my particular background. Instead of accepting that maybe you're actually good at what you do, it is very, very difficult to change low self-esteem to high self-esteem. The other way of looking at this is the positive cycle. And you can even hear my voice get lighter as I talk about it. Someone with high self-esteem is very, very likely to end the day with high self-esteem. So let's say the person with high self-esteem about interviews is going to an interview. They're likely to have positive thoughts. And so they may think things like, I've got this, I'm going to do well, they're going to like me, I've got the perfect outfit. They get to the interview and they exhibit very desirable behaviors. And so maybe they answer a question and they realize later in the interview, oh, I had a better answer. They have the confidence to say, hey, earlier on you asked me about the kind of tools and strategies I use in this situation. I would like to add something to that. And at the end of the interview, there's more positive thoughts. Of course, they're going to hire me. I think they're going to give me the job. I think they liked me. And so the person very likely who starts the day with high self-esteem will end the day with high self-esteem. Now, let's talk about what happens in the case where the person does not get a job offer. They, again, will be likely to look at it more balanced, or to justify that. So a more balanced perspective is more likely with somebody with high self-esteem. So they might think, okay, maybe there were a lot of good people who interviewed for this job, and they may have actually the confidence to call and find out, hey, what could I do better in future interviews? Or they may justify it and say, well, I guess this just wasn't the job for me. And so you can see this really big difference between when you start the day with low self-esteem and when you start the day with high self-esteem. And so my point is, if you have low self-esteem in a certain area, it is well worth going through whatever it takes to start thinking more positively about yourself. And as I said before, a lot of that is, how do you talk to yourself? Okay, because how we talk to ourselves really does matter. There's a concept called the self-fulfilling prophecy, and that is when your expectations of an event or situation make that outcome more likely to occur. And so let's say in one of the examples we used before, that somebody is auditioning for American Idol. If going into that audition they think, I'm going to get it, I'm going to be so great that they're going to get me on stage, well, that's a really positive way of looking at it. And so already the person is thinking positively. They get on stage, and because they have high self-esteem, they're likely to exhibit those desirable behaviors and then have positive thoughts afterwards. So maybe the judges even say, I'm not so sure about you. They'll say, hey, I've got another song I can sing. And we've seen this happen, right, on those reality shows where somebody just belts out another song, and then the judges are really impressed, and they're like, okay, we're going to put you forward. You can go to Hollywood. And so the idea here is, when somebody already thinks they're going to do well, they make it much more likely that they're going to be successful. And on the opposite end, if somebody thinks they're going to do poorly, they make that poor performance much more likely.